So as Dwayne said, what we're going to do is go through the data, stop. We'll ask you to invite questions from everyone as we kind of go through the session. And then again, we've got this data from Rhiannon and Branislav. Are you co-presenting with Rhiannon? Okay, so the two of you are presenting at the end. Okay, so without any further ado, we're going to get started. The first thing that you need to know is a little bit of context for the data. So all the data that I'm going to present today with Dwayne is data that has come from organizations that are using the Engaging Networks platform. So we literally went through the hundreds of organizations that use the technology and aggregated information across all of those organizations. There's a few things to mention about that. One is that it is an international data set. So this is not just UK-based nonprofits. It includes nonprofits in Canada, it includes nonprofits in the United States, Australia, and we also have a fair number of international nonprofits because just by the nature of the software that we offer, it's very customizable. So a lot of international groups use it because they can twist it in they can use the software in different languages without restrictions, et cetera. So we do have groups that actually use the technology in up to 30 or 40 countries worldwide. So it is international data. The total data set, and we didn't necessarily look at the total data set for all metrics, but the total data set is about 40 million hosted records on our servers. And the last thing to mention is that, of course, we do process on Engaging Networks data for campaigning, whether that's what I refer to as email advocacy, so where you are asking your supporters to obviously write a message to not just necessarily a member of parliament, it could be a corporate decision maker or leader, it could be an individual like the prime minister, etc. Obviously they're running petitions as well on the software. On the fundraising side, obviously we're processing both single and recurring gifts, memberships, that kind of thing. And we also have a fully integrated email tool. And that's important to reference because actually a lot of organizations, when you're looking at numbers of new data records, if they're also using our email tool, some of those numbers will get skewed because obviously if they're doing most of their marketing through email-based marketing, a lot of those records, for example, won't be new, they'll be existing supporters. So some of those things come into play when we start looking at the data, but that's kind of the general backdrop of the data set that we used. So the first metric that I really want to present is what we call this donor activist metric. So what we did was we looked, for example, in 2014 across a wide number of organizations and we said, okay, let's take a look at everybody who in that 12-month period did at least one advocacy action. So they either signed a petition or they did an email to target advocacy campaign. How many of you actually use Engaging Networks? Okay, so a few of you do. Just as a word of advice, when you do set up things like petitions, there's a subtype and you can say, actually, this is a petition as opposed to just a regular data capture. Make sure you label those things as petitions because it will help you in terms of your reporting on the software. So we looked at anyone during the period of calendar 2014 that did an advocacy action, either a petition or an email advocacy action, and we looked at those records to see what percentage of those records also made a donation during the same period. So this brings in a little bit of bias because someone could have taken an email advocacy action, for example, in December, and they may have made a donation in January or February, and obviously they would not be considered as part of this number, but by the same token, you're going to get some of that happening on the front end as well. So the number's not perfect, but it's actually pretty good. Just to give you an idea, we were looking at 3.83 million activists in calendar 2014. So that's 3.3 million people who took either an email advocacy action or a petition across all of our clients that are part of the pool. And out of those 3.3 million, the average across the board was 4.2%. So it's an interesting metric because, again, it's an average number. And you might think, well, you know what? Out of all of our activists in our organization, we have 4.5% or 5% that are actually, making a donation on top of being an activist. But the reality, though, is that there's also, for example, a number of organizations that did exceedingly well. And you can see the number there, which is 14%. It was a relatively small organization. They actually had just under 2,000 or just over 2,000 advocacy actions taken. But it does go to show that for that one organization, they did manage to convert 14% of those activists into a donor. So again, if you're thinking about, well, I'm at the average or I'm somewhere near the average, think higher and think, well, you know what, if my average gift is 50 pounds and I can increase, for example, on 50,000 people taking action, my total conversion rate to donors by 50% by going from 4% to 6%, that represents literally thousands of pounds for you in a year. So again, this is just to give you an overall idea of the benchmark. Interestingly enough, the actual average, if you just looked at email advocacy, so people who just did email advocacy, how many of those made a donation? The average was 4.03%. For people who signed a petition, the average percentage of those who made a donation was actually 2.97%. It's probably too small of a data set to be able to infer what that really means, but it could be that, for example, people who just signed petitions are less engaged and therefore less likely to donate. So that helps to inform your strategy a bit, because you might be thinking, well, you know what, if we're more likely to get donors out of the people who do email advocacy, if we're doing other types of follow-up to convert those individuals to donors, maybe we want to focus more on the people who are doing email advocacy versus people who are doing petitions, for example. So this is just an interesting piece of data, because again, I think most organizations now are really trying to make sure that their activists are given an opportunity or encouraged to obviously donate to the organization to support their work as well. Yes, question from Branislava, even before I asked for questions, Branislava.
I read your mind.
Okay, perfect. What's your question? I hear. I think you have to talk into the mic, actually.
I'm loud.
Yeah, I think for the recording.
So this is the data from engaging networks.
Correct.
So it assumes that people are using your donation platform in order to get these percent conversion rates.
This is organizations that are using us for
Sure.
advocacy and fundraising.
So do you know from discussions with any of your clients whether this kind of chimes with their experience when they kind of look at their whole supporter database?
Yeah. So so the question is, does it chime? And yeah, the answer, it does chime. I would have liked to have actually spent a lot more time on this data to go in and look at some of the clients that have outlying very good performance or very poor performance. And that's one of the things that we're going to do. So you can do this now if you want to, but engagingnetworks.co will redirect to what we're calling a data community, which I just set up this morning. And what we're trying to do is, if you're an Engaging Networks client and you want to get some of these metrics, some of them you can get in your dashboard already, but if you want to get these metrics, complete that form and we can send you the information that's specific to your organization. But we also want to kind of keep this conversation going. So we want to be able to encourage you to tell us what metrics are useful for you, and also, if we can, start providing more benchmark data as well over time. So if you go there and sign up, that'll be great. But yeah, this data does jive. So let me just show you one other thing here. This is one organization that I picked out which had a very good, and I think what was probably a typical rate. It's the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. There's a very stroppy looking Stephen Harper up there. And so they basically campaign and fundraise to encourage the Canadian government to continue funding for obviously public broadcasting in Canada. And if you look at their data, they had 75,335 email advocacy records, so another way of referring that is 75,335 individuals who did an email to target advocacy action in 2014, and of those, 3,648 also made a donation to the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. So their rate was, for example, was 4.84. But I know this organization, so I know what they do. They do telephone, for example, follow-up to make sure that individuals are being solicited via telephone. They don't do it to their whole list, but they do it to individuals, certain individuals within their list. I also know they're very aggressive in terms of making sure that they invite their activists to make donations and fund very specific campaigns that they're running. So this is probably a fairly typical number for an organization that is doing a lot of active email follow-up with activists to encourage them to donate, coupled with some telephone solicitation basically after they've taken action. Any other questions? Yep. Dwayne, do you want to just maybe pass the mic around? And
I just wanted to check, I mean, obviously you've broken that down into petitions and email advocacy, but in some cases, what would be, I guess, in effect, for somebody creating this in your network would be a petition, but they might not necessarily call it a petition. It might be like make a pledge or, you know, sign for a particular cause.
Yep.
Have you done anything in breaking it down in terms of, you know, if somebody was, if the ask was join our movement, or the ask was, you know, make a pledge as opposed to just sign a petition, are the conversion rates, you know, different?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is really hard, actually, because, for example, if you go into the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting onto that page I just pulled up, they're actually asking people to sign a petition, but they're actually emailing an individual with the message in the back end. So it becomes very hard for us to kind of try and control the way that clients actually define their actions and qualify them. But for example, we do have a third category, which is data capture. So that's kind of just forms that people could be building and using for anything. But that's kind of a wild card because we really don't know what those forms are being used for. We do have another category, which is email signups. So again, it's like a subtype to a data capture. And so that's another one where we could do it. But it really is contingent on our clients classifying the pages that they're building. And if they don't do that effectively, then it's impossible for us to kind of, you know what to do. And I also just wanted to mention very quickly, I asked a few people just for some tips about ways that they could actually improve, for example, your percentage. Who thinks, by the way, just out randomly, who thinks that if you have the data for your organization, who thinks you're doing better than this? A little bit? Okay. Who thinks you're not doing as well? A few of you. Okay. So I asked Rachel Collinson, who many of you know. She's with Extraordinary Fundraising, and I asked her, she couldn't be here today, so I just asked her to let me know if she had some tips to basically help encourage organizations that are trying to convert activists to donors. And here is some of the suggestions she had. Always ask for a donation after every campaign ask, with a tangible outcome that contributes to the campaign. For example, funding a billboard with a message to MPs, which is also one of the things that Canadian Broadcasting often do. Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, they often tie a fundraising ask to actually a campaigning request. Ask for a phone number after a campaign action and call them to set up a direct debit. Make sure that any donation form is pre-filled as much as possible with the campaigner's details, and make it as easy to pay as possible. One-click donation or PayPal, for example. Again, for Engaging Networks clients, you can do one-click and you can do those things. I think Rachel's really talking here specifically about someone who's just signed a petition and they're going straight into a donation ask. And don't think of your list as campaigners, think of them as people. Obvious, right? Segment people who have taken tons of actions. Ask these super keen folks for a direct debit, so for monthly giving. And always follow up the fundraising campaign with news on what the money has done to everybody on the list, so they can see the impact of giving. Thank often personally and profusely. So that's Rachel's sort of list of tips and suggestions. I'll turn that into a slide. She just sent it to me. I'll turn it into a slide and add it to the slide deck. But again, make sure though that if you're thinking about your communication, especially if you're doing email communication, to thank people for making a donation or taking part in advocacy actions, always make sure that you're focusing on giving people relevant, important content that you would want to read yourself. So it's not just the act of sending an email, it's putting in an equal amount of thought into what you're writing, how you're writing it. You need to give people engaging content. These are the mechanics of it, which are important, but the content is obviously equally important. Dwayne, anything to add?
Yeah, just to go back to the first slide, just one or two things to add.
Yep.
I think it's really important that when we look at what our goals are for, so first of all, this is a really encouraging number, because if you look at converting people from an action to actually a donation, the rates people have been telling me has often been between 0.1 and 0.3 and maybe even 0.5% type of conversion. That's the type of numbers other people have been telling me. I don't know how that resonates. Glenn, you might have other numbers as well. But, and so the fact that 4% for the email advocacy are likely to donate is quite encouraging, and actually should be encouraging for fundraisers and working with them. But I also would say don't set the 4% thing as your goal. I would say set the 14% as your goal, because what we often find with the averages is that they're brought down by the people who aren't doing anything or are doing a lot of stuff bad. So the people who are doing well are the ones you want to target for. Now what I must say when you said a small sample is that actually the 14%, there's a good possibility, if it's a small sample, they're actually doing stuff that's highly relevant to that audience. And so this means not that you have to be small, but that you have to potentially segment to get more relevant to each of those different groups to get more performance out of them. And when the bigger you treat them as a homogeneous community, of which they are not, the lower you're likely to engage them with. So that's just some other ideas and tips around that data.
Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to mobile. And by the way, if these slides look really random and bizarre, this one actually isn't. It makes sense, but I just had to find images. So this is basically, it's a little bit, it's really only a partial metric, because the metric that you really want to get is the conversion rate of mobile views to mobile conversion of the page, as opposed to just mobile as a percentage of the overall transactions you're processing. But it still gives you an idea, I think, of what's going on. So essentially, this is data where we looked at all pages from clients, again, over the period of 2014 right up to March 2015. And what we did was we looked at, for example, by different types of transactions, so single gift, recurring gift, petition, whatever, what percentage across all of our clients are being processed on a mobile device. So if you look at email advocacy, the number is 17%. So across the board, organizations that are putting out an email advocacy ask, 17% of those are actually converting them on a mobile device. The other 83% are obviously doing it on a desktop. This number varies wildly. There are organizations that are getting 50% of their total conversions, for example, for this type of request on a mobile device. So if you're doing a lot of email marketing out to your list and you're doing a lot of it frequently, you're much likely to get a much higher percentage on email. But again, that doesn't guarantee that you're converting them effectively, but I have seen numbers within this list. This is just the average. There are organizations that are upwards of 50%. And also depends on the pages. So that's email advocacy. Strangely enough, 13% is what people are converting as a percentage of the total transactions for a petition. I thought that number would have been higher, because a petition effectively is just asking someone to complete a form. And if you're using our technology, for example, when you click through from an email, you pre-populate the data on the landing page. So it gets really easy for someone just to kind of go, yep, I'm just going to submit my name and add my name to this petition. But the actual percentage was lower, interestingly enough. So one of the things that we are going to do is kind of delve into this data a little bit more to find out what's going on. An email sign-up form, only 8.73% are actually converting an email sign-up form on a mobile device, which kind of makes sense. You'd think it would be a lower number because people are not necessarily scrolling around on your website on their mobile device and then signing up that way. 6.5% for single donation and 1.09% for recurring donation. Again, so those kind of make sense to me. And those numbers are only going to grow, obviously. But again, if you're looking at where should we be in terms of mobile conversion, you really should be looking at numbers that are probably double this. Because it depends on the number of people. It depends whether you're sending email, because email will increase the number of people that read email and convert on a page on a mobile device. It depends on how you're set up, obviously, with your mobile landing page, et cetera. So these numbers are the average, but I think that most organizations would probably be, if you look at your individual metrics and engaging networks for overall transactions by transaction type, which you can find in the dashboard, you probably find that your numbers are higher. If they're below this and you are doing email advocacy, email marketing out to your list, then there's probably something wrong with your conversion on your mobile, because look carefully at your mobile versions of your pages, because there's definitely something wrong if your numbers are below this. And I'm just going to do two things. This is one organization which has done an incredible job of putting together a mobile optimized landing page for fundraising. They do the same thing for advocacy. If you guys have your a mobile device, go to hsi.org right now. And the irony is you're actually going to pull up a website that's not mobile optimized. But then when you click on donate from that page, look at the page. So hsi.org, click on the donate link and see what you get on your mobile device. Because what you're going to see is a little bit of this. It is literally a page that allows you to process single and recurring gifts using a tab, multiple currencies. It's got a gift date option if your country happens to be UK. They've just done an absolutely brilliant job of making this page optimized for mobile. And if you look at this organization's total percentage of mobile transactions, or their percentage of mobile transactions as a percentage of their total transactions for fundraising, for example, is 18%, which is obviously 3 times the average that I showed you on the previous page. So this is not the only page that they have, the one that you're looking at now, or this one that I'm showing you. They have a number of other pages, but these guys, again, are really rock stars when it comes down to having built a mobile optimized page, and you can see it in their numbers. They're literally converting 3 times the average that all the clients across engaging networks on mobile. And that's because they've done a really good job with their landing page. Questions? Yes. Dwayne, can you do the honors?
Sorry, I'm just curious, why is the $50 in yellow?
Why is what? Sorry?
The $50 in yellow and the rest is in green.
Oh, I think it's just I selected it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I thought it was
that also might
some
be the default. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, they've done some nice JavaScript and jQuery in this page. But yeah, other questions about mobile? So who thinks that for campaigning, you're converting more than 17% of your email to target advocacy on mobile? One? Anyone else? No? Okay. Who has got mobile optimized pages for advocacy and fundraising? Okay. That's not everyone. So, obviously, there's definitely work to do there. But you are missing out. I mean, Dwayne, anything else you want to add on mobile?
I mean, what were your reflections when you saw that number? Were you expecting higher numbers to be converting? Yeah, I was expecting that too. Considering that in 2014 was supposed to be the year when more than 50% of people started accessing stuff on mobile devices. So we're now into 2015. And so over that year, we're supposed to have met that 50% pile. So the suggestion there is we've got a long way to go with mobile optimized sites, a long way to go with learning how to mobile optimize our sites, because we can talk about having a responsive page, but even that, we have to learn how to make that really fine-tuned, like we've been doing on web pages for the past decade. We've been getting better at making those work well for laptops and desktops. So I think we've all got a lot of work to do in this area, including for the ECF live sites and things like that.
Okay, last questions on mobile? Oh, yeah, one more.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I don't know much about this, but is there a mobile app for donating, I think, which a lot of charities can use?
A mobile app?
Yes, I think there's one.
There's definitely apps that are out there.
So have you monitored them in terms of whether that increases donating or not?
Well, it depends how you're directing people to the app. So if you're talking about an app on a phone as opposed to, like most organizations will use email to market their fundraising requests. So in which case then it doesn't make sense to send them to an app. It makes a lot more sense to send them to a mobile optimized page, basically. So an app is useful for fundraising, but most people, if they're using the app to fundraise, it's going to be an app that they might be using anyway. I mean, it's a completely different kind of mindset for someone who's basically donating through an app versus someone who's responding to an appeal from the nonprofit, usually via email or even via social media, for example. So apps are useful, but again, as they're sitting on your phone, you have to think about what's going to motivate someone to use the app. So what's going to drive the person to actually download the app on their phone and then think to actually go and donate, using the app. And again, most of the fundraising that organizations do is primarily driven by email for the time being, or social media, but social media to a much smaller percentage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So we're at 2 o'clock. Yep. 2 o'clock. Okay, great. 2 more questions. Yep.
The same way you had a best case scenario or best case situation for the transactions, just for general transactions, do you have a best case scenario for the mobile transactions? How you got, where you have 18% here for fundraising, but do you know what the best case scenario for some of the better?
It's over 40%. So, but you need the other metric to really properly assess that, which is the total page views on mobile that you're converting on mobile. So that's not a metric that I've shared. So 40% makes sense, but you need to know it really as a subset of the total people that are viewing on a mobile. So, but that data you have as well if you're on engaging networks, but that's an important piece not to miss. So, yep, so conversion rate, yep.
people who land on the page from a mobile device convert, or is it out of everyone who lands on the page, 17%?
Converted on a mobile, yeah. So basically that 17%, or this case 18%, that's what I was saying, is there's another metric that you're missing, which is the actual conversion rate. So you want to know, of the people who load this page on a mobile device, what percentage are converting, for example, versus this number, which is just as a percentage of your total transactions, this is the percentage that are being processed successfully on a mobile device. So it's not as good a piece of data as actually the conversion rate on mobile, but in order to do that, we had to rerun the numbers differently, and I didn't have time. So
Okay. Yeah, because it's going to depend on the audience and what proportion of...
Totally,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. You need the universe, like you need to get the universe to be able to work out the conversion rate.
Yeah.
And as I said, that would be a much more useful metric than just looking at as a percentage of total donations. It's indicative, it kind of tells you, it gives you an idea where you should be, but it's not the best metric, so I agree. Any other questions on mobile? Yep, one at the very top.
I think you've answered most of it, but I wanted to say about the $50 box that's been selected. That's a pre-selected box, so there's. Do you have any kind of like metrics on pre-selecting amounts and things like that, and whether that leads to different higher conversions on mobile and so forth?
Okay, so the question about pre-selecting this box, for example, this will vary dramatically from organization to organization. And so what you need to be doing, if we call that the asking string, so the options that people can actually select as well as the default selection within the asking string. For every organization, you need to be able to go out and basically randomize web traffic to several versions of this page with different asking strings, not even just the default selection, by changing the range of selections and whether it's 27 pounds or 28 pounds or 15 pounds. The values that you set and how they're set will have a huge impact on your average gift that you raise. So, but what works for your organization might not work for another organization. So for example, one of our clients is a university in Canada. Their average gift is probably 3 times what it is some other nonprofits. So if you're looking at, does it have an impact in terms of conversion rate? Absolutely. Does it have an impact on the average gift and raising your average gift? Absolutely. Is there like a default number that you should use? No. You need to be able to actually work out what the best successful asking string is for you, as well as the default selection. And then, again, I'm not sure if you're on Engaging Networks, but if you can, you then actually set profiles or segments for high-level donors, mid-level donors that you define, and you can actually now, when someone clicks through from an email, you show them an asking string, which is actually specific to their segment. So if I'm a high-level donor, I'm getting a completely different asking string than this one versus someone who's giving you, 2 pounds or 10 pounds or 5 pounds. So you definitely need to be thinking about this. You definitely need to be investigating your average gift, but you need to test it with your audience and figure out what works best for you. The difference can literally be tens of thousands of pounds a year. Yep.
Graham, do you think within about 10 minutes you can sort of wrap up? So
absolutely. Yep, totally. So this next one is advocacy activity level in 2014. This is just kind of giving you a sense of what the average number of actions that people are creating throughout the year. So the first one is just for petitions. So the average client on Engaging Networks is basically building and releasing 7.6 petitions over the course of the year, 21.1 email advocacy actions. And if you just combine them and you said, okay, well, just any advocacy action, the average number is about 19 across all clients. The highest was actually 195 by an organization called Walk Free. They did 157 email target actions, but I know that they also they have a lot of local campaigners around the world that create actions for sort of small regional asks, and they are international, so they do a very high level. The only really super interesting thing about this is that if you look at activist retention rates, actually the organizations that are doing more advocacy and more consistently throughout the year definitely have higher retention rates. There's a correlation between that data within the data that we've seen. So this is just kind of giving you a sense. So if you, on average, do 19 petitions / email advocacy actions, could be a pledge, anything else, how many of you are doing more than 19 a year? How many of you are doing, I'm assuming that means everyone is doing less than 19 a year. Who's doing more than 10? Only a few of you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6, 7. Okay. And how many of you are doing less than 10? Versus 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. So again, I mean, you don't want to communicate for the sake of communicating. You need to be communicating something's relevant. But obviously, that the more that you keep that email channel of communication going with updates, requests, and so on and so forth, obviously it will have a huge impact. So the number of actions, this is just to kind of give you a sense of where people are at. I'm going to show you 2 more slides, and I'm going to actually ask Lynn to come up. So this is activist retention rate. So this is it's a very important metric. If you think about from March 2015, if you think from March 2013 to March 2014, everybody who did one advocacy action, so whether they signed a petition, an email advocacy target campaign, anyone who did one between March 2013 and March 2014, how many of those same activists repeated just one action from March 2013, or I should have gone back, anyway, but March 2014 to March 2015. So in other words, how good are you at retaining the people who have done an action 12 months after they've taken at least one action? So you can do it as a rolling monthly metric, and again, this is a metric that's in the Engaging Networks dashboard. So the average retention rate is 28.6%. So that effectively means that 70% on average across all of our clients of the people who are taking an advocacy action do not take one the following year. And in all likelihood, they will never do it again. So think about the amount of time and energy that you guys spend trying to promote your campaigns and get them into your database, taking action for the important issues that you guys are campaigning on, and think about what relatively small percentage of those are still going to be around a year later. So this, just by the way, in terms of the data set, this was based on 4 million activists. So this is based on 4 million individuals who, between March 2013 and March 2014, did one advocacy action, and then that means that 1.15 million of those 4 million activists then did an action the following year. So that's 3 million people who were recruited to various causes who are now doing nothing for those organizations. Is that okay? Well, it's not okay, but it's, yeah. Branislava, you have a question? No.
So do you want to analyze, because I actually haven't guessed why that is.
Well,
I wanted to hear what you
a guess. I have actually, I've got a guest speaker to address that in a moment. So yeah, I've got a special guest speaker. We did the same thing for donations. I have no idea why this is a moon. Anyway, it's actually slightly higher, strangely enough. It's 31%. If you look at kind of most of the metrics, especially in North America, the average donor retention rate in the States is now actually hovering just above 25%. So 31% is actually pretty good. But if you look historically, this number has been dropping for the last 10 years. And in general, people who are online donors tend to be harder to retain than people who are donating via direct mail or other channels. So there's definitely less loyalty from online donors, and that's just a generic metric that's very well known. The amazing thing about this is that the highest organization actually had a donor retention rate of 48.92%. I mean, that's huge. That's an enormous gain. If you think about that, if you think again, just do the math. Someone's giving you 25 pounds, you've got 50,000 donors, and you're in a position now, if you want to increase this, for example, from 25% to 50%, so instead of retaining 25,000 of those donors, 12,500 of those donors, you now retain, 25,000 of those donors, you retain 50%, that represents a huge amount of money. And so on the fundraising side, you're doing, the same numbers are there. The actual lowest was about 19.02%. So again, 80% of the people who make a donation to that particular organization disappear after a year, and they are never to be seen again. So again, this whole idea of donor retention is obviously very important, and this is based on a pretty big pool of data. This is based on almost 61,000 donors that transacted in calendar 2013, who then, of which 18,800 were retained and made a subsequent gift also in calendar 2014. So this is not an unusual metric. It's actually a metric that we've seen before in other data sets, but it's shocking nonetheless. But again, there's hope. There is an organization, and actually there were several organizations that did extremely well at actually retaining a very high percentage. So it's not to kind of discourage you, it's just to kind of say, well, hey, how do we do a better job of retaining those donors or activists? And for that, I'm going to actually isolate one organization. It's called Global Justice Now. And they used to be called World Development Movement. And they had some great numbers, and I'm just going to introduce Glenn in a minute. But for example, in 2014, they ran 2 petitions and 37 email advocacy pages in 2014. They had a 63% activist retention rate and a 42.9% donor retention rate. So the question is, how did they do it? How did they do it? And fortunately, we have here with us Glenn. Come on up here, Glenn. This is totally spontaneous. I had no idea that Glenn was going to be here today. So Glenn basically works for More Onion, and he used to work at World Development Movement, and he's going to tell you how the magic works.
Well, I think there are 3 things I would say, and this is based on having worked at the organisation now known as Global Justice Now, and also the project that we did at More Onion last year as well. I think there are 3 things. The first thing, and I always go on about this at ECF, so I'm sorry for boring anyone who's heard me talk about this before, but is reactivation of people who haven't done an action in the past 6 to 12 months or made a donation. And so we ended up with a rolling program of reactivating people who hadn't taken action or made a donation at all in the past 6 to 12 months, automatically get an email with a survey and then a follow-up 2 or 3 actions over the course of 4 to 6 weeks to try and re-engage them. And in the specific campaign that I worked on back in September and October last year, we managed to reactivate 2,000 out of 6,500 people who were emailed who hadn't taken an action in the past 12 months. So I think that goes quite a long way to getting that percentage higher. The second thing is having a series of online actions and having a narrative of campaigns. Not every activist wants to email their MP or wants to email Justine Greening or wants to sign a petition. Some people want to do some of those things and not all of them. So making sure you have a different range of ways that activists can engage with a campaign, and a campaign doesn't always mean signing a petition or always mean emailing your MP about a specific topic, and you've got different ways that someone can engage in that topic. And also then theming the donation pages around the specific campaign actions, a little bit like what Rachel mentioned, obviously that, but trying to make sure that the donations are linked in some way to the campaigns that people are taking, and there's a clear narrative between them. And then last of all is landing page optimization, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that now because you should come along to my session at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon where we'll talk at great length about landing page optimization. And but basically, yeah, landing pages that are not just optimized for mobile, because that does make a huge difference, but landing pages that you've tested and know convert huge numbers of people that land on those pages. Ideally, more than 70% of people who actually click on a link in an email and land on an action page should be going on to complete that action, either on desktop or on mobile. And there's a huge number of different things you can do to make that happen. And as I say, I'll talk a lot about that tomorrow.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. I'm so glad that you happen to be here. So there's also just, again, this is in Engaging Networks, but again, there's other tools out there as well, but you want to be able to use things like automated email marketing. So you want to make sure that, for example, as people are coming onto your list, especially, so a new supporter, a new donor, that you're automating email marketing out to those individuals based on the types of actions they're doing. You might want to test different types of series based on geographic location, based on type of page they're processing. There's a whole range of filters that you can use, but it's just very important if you don't have time to really look after new supporters that are coming into your list, they're going to get disengaged very quickly unless they hear from you. And so use automated email marketing as an opportunity to make sure you're connecting with those new records, and you will obviously have a huge impact on your retention rates over time. But that would be an additional piece of advice to what Glenn has suggested. Questions? We're just conscious. I've got one more slide, I think. Any questions on retention? No. Okay. All right. So the last thing, recruitment numbers. I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. So this is the second to last slide, but this one's going to be fairly simple. We just looked at the number of new records created by transaction type. So this is someone who's coming onto your file by taking one of these types of actions. So as you would expect, the number of people who immediately, without being an existing supporter on your file, who become an immediate recurring donor, monthly donor, is only 1.34%. So you would expect that. So what this metric means is that of the people who are recurring donors on your list, for example, for 2014, 1.34 of them were created as a new record on your list. And that could be, there's a bunch of things that could influence that. They might have been an offline donor and that data didn't exist in engaging networks or wasn't imported into engaging networks, but still it's a very small percentage. 19.44% who made a single donation were, again, new to the file, so they had never done any advocacy or anything else. They're a brand new donor and a new supporter. 27.86% for email advocacy. So if you think about this, these are all these people who you're doing email advocacy. A third of them now are going to be new to your file. How are you looking after those 30% of the people taking this action for you to make sure that they retain the engagement level with them? 42% on petition. I think that's probably because a lot of organizations use petitions, obviously, as a recruitment tool. So it's quite logical that actually you would have a much higher percentage of new records through petitions. That makes sense. And 63.52% for an email sign-up form. And that also makes sense because, if you think about it, someone's just visiting your website, they might not make a donation or take part in a campaign, but they might want to sign up for your newsletter, your email list. So a huge percentage of those, 2/3 of them almost, are new. And just to give you a sense of the data pool, it was 620,000 email signups that we looked at, 9.2 million email advocacy actions or individual records, and 195,000 single donors. So again, nice big chunky sections of data, chunks of data to be able to look at these metrics. So they're actually quite useful. And if you think about it, someone signing up for your email list, remember 2/3 of them are new to your list. You need to make sure that you continuously engage them. They've taken the first step. What are you doing now to draw them further into the work you're doing? What narrative are you what stories are you telling them about your work? You need to be able to think about those things very, very carefully. And that's, again, why when you're creating an email sign-up form on Engaging Networks, make sure that you create that as a subtype for email sign-up because you'll get this kind of interesting metric. The last thing was actually an attempt to look at revenue, so total donations that come through by source, essentially, and it was a total bust. So we just basically looked at how much money, what was the average gift of someone who came onto your list after doing, for example, an email sign-up form versus signing a petition versus someone who does an email advocacy. So again, 20 people sign up on an email form. What percentage, what's the average gift of everyone who donated of those 20? What's the average gift for them versus people who did email advocacy versus, petition? And the number just for the pounds for GBP was like 17.1 pounds for an email sign up, 18.1 for a petition, 18 pounds 75 for email advocacy. So there is kind of a trend there, but the numbers are so close that it's hard really to distinguish. And that might relate back again to your asking strings and what you're actually asking for them. So if your asking strings are not optimized, if you're not maybe asking for more money from an email advocacy activist than someone who just signs up on email, maybe you need to think about that because maybe the email advocacy activist is more likely to give you a higher gift than someone who just signs up on your email list. So giving them different varying asking strings, for example, based on their transaction type might influence these numbers. But these numbers in and of themselves didn't really reveal a whole lot. In US dollars, there was a couple of skewed numbers as well. So engagingnetworks.co, if you guys want to be able to join what we're calling our data community, the idea is that we want to kind of keep talking to you about the metrics that you find useful. As we look at more metrics, we want to push that information out to you. So if you want to sign up for it, go to that engagingnetworks.co. It'll redirect to a form you can complete and then just submit it, and then we'll add you to our list and kind of keep growing that.